Well, as you can see, I'm still here. I ain't going nowhere. You see, when shit get real for me, I don't run. I don't get on no raft or no inner tube. I stay in my fucking war. I stand and I fight.
The game is the game. Once you're in, there are only two ways out. If you're lucky, you'll be able to grow old, have kids, make something out of your life. But once you're in this game, you always run the risk of this.
I don't know any old wrinkled drug dealers. They're either dead or inside, Tasha. That doesn't scare you?
Ghost once told Tasha he didn't know any old wrinkly drug dealers, they were either dead or in jail. That's why he wanted out from the beginning of Power. And Ghost was the first character I thought of in the context to Kanan's narration when Unique made yet another move in killing Richard and Sunny. He was telling us you can't just dip your toes into the street game and then dip out when the going gets tough or when you feel like leaving. Doing what Unique did to Richard and Sunny with no remorse, he was basically reinforcing that idea. The game requires loyalty and ruthless decisions. There's no in between. You're either all in or all out.
If you get distracted, you did.
So that was Kanan's narration in a nutshell. There's no half measures. You can't live a double life just like we've seen back in Power. But episode 3 was more than just about Unique making his moves. There were a lot of subliminal messages once again that I think we could all relate to. There was Lou's message on suicide, Juke mentioning how she also feels let down by her country, and I'm sure a lot of us would have felt this one. So I'm going to touch on a few real world examples such as systemic racism, and also a few examples from Snowfall, because they also delivered a very similar message. I think there's also a lot to unpack with the Thomas dinner scene as well. I do have a few theories, and I do think they are holding a few secrets back, but we are going to dive deep into all of it, unpacking all the conversations, clues, Easter eggs, along with a theory or two, for all things Raising Kanan, Season 4, Episode 3. Now, this episode kicks off with Unique making yet another move on Rock's organization. In 402, we saw him getting rid of Andre, whose body still hasn't been found. I do think it is important we make that point. Rock has no idea Andre's dead. She called him a bit later on, but there was no answer. And I do think with his death being at the apartment, it may take a day or two, maybe more, for anyone to realise Andre's gone. So that's something I'm sure they'll answer either in 404 or 405. But here he was, pointing a gun to Richard and Sunny, who used to work for him early in Season 3. Not only did he take both of them out, where they died in each other's arms, he took Rock's stash, which he later used to pay Ellie Tyler back. More on that a bit later on. Over at Marvin's, Jukebox was back, and you could definitely tell this was Marvin's daughter, but mainly because I'm sure the food you get in the army is as basic as they come. Now, as Marvin and Juke were talking, Marvin did question her going AWOL. You can't just up and leave when you took an oath, and right on cue. The conversation was interrupted by Sergeant Healy and Sergeant Falk. They were here to remind Jukebox of the commitment she made, and how she can't turn her back on her country. However, Juke saying that her country has also let her down plenty of times. I think a lot of people would have felt this one, because it's facts. Marvin said fuck the army and the white man wars, which did get me thinking about Snowfall, because they really did deliver this message well.
I try to do shit the right way. Went to the other side, know what I learned? The game's rigged.
We look at what happened through Franklin Saint, Sissy, Jerome, Aunt Louie, Teddy aka Reed. Whose war are you really fighting, and what for? The CIA is going to turn on you. They're funding some war by funneling mega amounts of cocaine into the country, flooding the neighborhoods, causing irreparable damage. The constant racism. You try and work hard or do right like Sissy did, or just like Franklin tried to do at the beginning, you're just going to end up realizing the game's rigged. And now we'll be coming to a real world example in just a moment, so just hold on to that thought. But on Juke, she's someone who's really street smart and clued on about the world she lives in, as well as the rules they go by in the army. Mr. Bingham already warned her about certain societal issues and discrimination she could suffer in 401. She also saw Chalmers being kicked out because they found he had gay magazines. So she used that to get her entry-level separation by embracing her sexuality, and that was that. She was done. We saw her throwing away her uniform, but also throwing away her old outfit when she gave one hell of a performance back in Season 3. She actually killed this performance, and had Detective Tannen not come in when he did, who knows what could have been. But it's definitely over for Juke and music. I don't think we're ever going to see her going back. She's looking for something new, and well, just trying to find herself, just like Aisha mentioned back in 402. Now with Kanan, he came to see Joyce Thomas, who we all know is suffering from kidney cancer, but we learned in 401 and 402 the cancer has spread. Kanan was trying to convince her to speak to Rock, Marvin, and Lou, because they deserve to know. The Thomas family keep a lot of secrets. A lot has happened in the past, and we are going to get into it when we get to the Thomas family dinner. But even though a lot has happened between Kanan and Rock throughout seasons 1 to 3, Kanan did mention, if Rock was more honest, maybe things could have been different. However, this is where Joyce did set him straight. Even though Rock is a lot of things, and Joyce definitely agrees, at the end of the day, she was still his mother. And let's not get it twisted, Rock is probably up there as the worst mother in the Power universe. I do think I have asked this question before. Who would you guys have as the worst mother? There's definitely a few that could take the crown during different moments in the history of Power. But Kanan isn't totally innocent either. He made the decision to throw the entrance exam to Stuyvesant. He decided to get rid of Buck 20 with D-Wiz, which was also no doubt fueled by jealousy because of Davina. He made a lot of stupid decisions which led to the death of many in the streets. There are definitely a few perspectives you can look at when it comes to this relationship. Now, does it justify what Rock has done? Definitely not. But Joyce was also right. She is Kanan's mother. Now, in terms of the aftermath of Richard and Sonny's death, we saw law enforcement cordon off the restaurant with Marvin looking on, and this was a huge problem. Not only were Richard and Sonny Erwin's family, who Rock made a deal with in 307, Richard was also Kwan's wife's cousin. He mentioned back in season 3, his wife was Chinese in conversation with Unique, and even though he wasn't too fond of the Chinese, they were still his family. So that was going to be another issue entirely. As it is, Kwan raised Rock's prices by 20%, and so there's already a bit of tension. Now, Marvin mentioned that he may know who it could have been, Richard's nephew who he kicked out in 402 when he caught him stealing. But Rock needed to make sure they caught the right person. They couldn't just be dropping anyone, especially because we all know what happened when she jumped the gun with Scrap's death. She took Howard's word for it, trusted him, and the whole situation spiraled out of control. So Marvin said he will do a bit of digging. Now, this conversation also turned to Rock questioning Marvin about law enforcement, how they caught him visiting Stefano. However, he played it off as if law enforcement were just talking. You know how they do. They do sometimes try and tend to play you against each other by feeding you wrong information. Most recently, we saw it with Detective Carter in Book 2 Ghost, trying to turn Tariq and Monet against each other. We've also seen it back in Power. They do use this tactic to try and cause internal conflict, which in turn could make these drug kingpins sloppy, make mistakes, where law enforcement would be just waiting to capitalize. Although that's not actually the case with this one. I don't know if Rock actually saw through Marvin's bullshit, but because she's got so much other shit to deal with in terms of Richard and Sonny's death, Kwan, her relationship with Kanan, being there for Lou, and so much more, I'm really not sure whether she did actually clock on, but it definitely will come back around sooner or later, because Marvin got rid of one of Stefano's highest earners, and actions definitely have consequences. Not only will Rock lose her shit when she finds out the truth, we still need to see Stefano's reaction, which I assume will now come in 404. Now, here's where I think they threw a bit of a red herring. We saw Unique coming out of Kanan's apartment complex and bumping into Crystal, which really did leave her spooked. But the reason why I think it is a red herring, why would he burst into Kanan's apartment a bit later on and put a gun to OC if he was potentially working with Kanan? What was Unique really doing here? Was he just kind of scoping the place? Was he here to see someone else? I'm sure they'll definitely answer that question at some point, but I do think it is a red herring, so that's just my observation. Now, because she was so spooked, we saw her telling Kanan and trying to convince him, you shouldn't live where you work, and I do think she is right. Don't shit where you eat. We've also heard Rock mention in season 1, selling out of your own crib is a cardinal sin. It's one of many reasons why Marvin got locked up for a brief period. Crystal is definitely a keeper. Kanan just has to listen a little more, which I do actually think he did in 403. They went apartment shopping a bit later on in the episode, but where they came across something I made a point about earlier: equality, racism, being treated different. The real estate agent took one look at Kanan and Crystal and thought, nope, the apartment's already taken. Now, they could smell bullshit from a mile away. Something similar also happened with Rock back in season 2 when she was house hunting. But just like I like to say when it comes to Rock, what Rock wants, she normally gets. Whether it's the house in Forest Hills or the 2 apartments on top of each other in the projects, when Rock wants something, it's damn near impossible to stop. But this situation reminded me of a story I read about 2 years ago. Paul and Tanisha Austin owned a property in San Francisco. They had a property valued at around $998,000, but that was around $500,000 less than what it should have been. Why? Because of systemic racism. So this is the real-world example, which wasn't even too long ago. You're talking around 2 years ago. And I'm sure those who were property owners back in the 90s, or maybe just getting on the property ladder, may have stories which are very similar. But this is what I meant about being treated different. Now, while we're on Crystal, let's just round off with her meeting Rock. This is the first time these two are actually meeting face to face. They definitely would have known of each other and maybe saw each other during the music show back at the mall, but we never saw them have an interaction. So, Unique wasn't the only scary person she met in 403, but Rock is a different kind of intimidating. She can do this in a lot of different ways. We've seen her pull up to Palomar's with a gun, but this was slightly different. Now, I also maintain another point I've made before. They're giving a lot of screen time to Crystal, and I do think Kanan will have to go through a lot of pain to really turn. Jukebox is someone who's already felt the pain of Nicole's death, Kenya's death, the trauma of her relationship with Kenya in season 2, not being accepted for who she is, which she's definitely embracing more of in season 4, but there has been a lot of moments which has hardened Juke. Kanan definitely has had a few moments. He's lost D-Wiz in season 1. He lost Detective Howard, although not much of a relationship with Howard. He still needs to feel a lot more loss. That can definitely be OC. It can also be Crystal, and also Famous in season 4. Just to harden Kanan that much more, and maybe turn him from a pup into a wolf. But let's move on to the issue with Erwin. Now, Richard and Sunny were a part of Erwin's family. They were good people. He agreed to get into business with Rock back in 307. But this type of violence isn't what he signed up for, so he was reconsidering their business partnership. But again, you try and tell Rock no, or you're going back on the deal you made with her before. You're going to be met with this.
We shake hands when we negotiate. We throw hands when we renegotiate. And you don't want that, Poppy.
It's also like Kanan's narration mentioned, once you're in, you're all the way in. When you're out, you're all the way out. Now, this is where we saw Rock making her phone call to Andre Barnes. She wanted to know what his NYPD connects were saying about what was going on in the streets. She wanted to get to the bottom of who was hitting her organization, and she really could have done with Andre's help. However, just like we went through before, she has no idea he's gone, and that's going to be a major shock when she finds out. Dealing with Richard and Sunny's death is complicated enough. Just imagine when she learns about Andre, on top of Marvin's lies. Not looking good for Rock at all at the beginning of season 4, is it? I do think she is going to have to get some kind of law enforcement in her back pocket, which could potentially be these two. Now, just another small observation. Rock did leave Andre a voicemail. Now, depending on who finds his body, if it's law enforcement, if they hear the voicemail, guess who's going to be back on their radar? So that's just a little side thought. With Marvin, he was on a mission to find out exactly what happened with Richard and Sunny, and his first stop was Richard's nephew. However, he quickly not only found out it wasn't just his nephew, but Richard and Sunny also left behind a daughter, who's now become an orphan. We know deep down, Marvin does have a really big heart. He really does want to do right by some people, especially since his anger management classes back in season 2, where he met Gerald, and then also his daughters. But putting aside helping Gerald and his daughters for a moment, we've even seen him try and help Sam the Crackhead try to disappear, because as ruthless as he is, he still has a heart. He also came to see Ellie Tyler about whether he had heard anything about anybody hitting the Chinese restaurant. He then asked him to use his aunt, who works with child services, to track down a girl that the system grabbed. At the time, I thought it may have been Richard and Sunny's daughter, but everything that happened with them, their daughter becoming an orphan, it reminded him of Amber and Alice. So, it was actually Amber he was tracking down. And as I mentioned, Marvin really does have a big heart, even though this story is sad in itself in terms of how Amber's lost both her parents and also her sister. She did mention she has been separated from her sister. You can't help but feel a bit of happiness because you really can see how much Uncle Marvin meant to Amber. He also left her his phone number, and who knows, maybe Marvin does get a phone call a bit later on in season 4. Let's wait and see. Now, this is also where we saw Rock being confronted by Quan. She knew it was coming, but he really wasn't happy. He wanted answers, and he also wanted bodies. The problem that Rock had at this moment in time is you just can't go and drop anybody in the streets. She knows better than anyone, it has to be the person that was hitting them, or you end up with another situation like Scrappy. This is also where Quan mentioned Rock is replaceable, but I think that was a big mistake. We know Rock stands her ground against every opponent she's ever had. She deals with enemies and threats head on. She doesn't hide. The temperature's definitely increasing. They both know Quan is a problem, and I am sure Rock will kind of deal with him when the time comes. But they have to deal with the other issue at hand first, finding out who's hitting their operation, and then they can deal with the rest later. Now this is where they came to see Joaquin, Rock's old Colombian connect. Her and Joaquin have always been on good terms. Rock's problem was more with Juliana, but with Joaquin and Rock, they were always kind of straight up with each other. Now Joaquin mentioned maybe their old friend Tremon could have been pushing into their territory, and we know there's no love lost here. especially after Draymond betrayed her back in season 2, and as expected, she is going to be looking in the direction of Draymond. Now, with Lou and B-Rilla, I did mention in Lou's story arc, I wouldn't be surprised if B-Rilla proves to be someone who's very difficult to manage. I mentioned the difference between how B-Rilla is someone who's very raw and volatile, just like we saw in the meeting with Mr. Gelfand, compared to Famous, who you could definitely still nurture and mentor. You can't put your arm around B-Rilla's shoulder like you could do with Famous. You really can't control someone like B-Rilla. Now, during this conversation when Lou was talking to Mr. Gelfand mentioned they never really used to trust banks. They used to keep piles of cash back at home, and it's still a tradition he's still kept on, which I do think was a huge slip up from his end. We all thought Rock pillow talking about her stash to Unique back in season 3 could backfire. Well, it didn't. But with this one, letting someone know where you keep your stash, that never really is a good idea, especially someone in B-Rilla's shoes who's very desperate. This is why I mentioned during Lou's story arc, could B-Rilla prove to be more trouble than he's worth? Is he just going to continue bringing Lou down? This conversation between B-Rilla and Mr. Gelfand also goes a lot deeper, which I'm sure we'll definitely unpack this coming week. But there's one more topic I do think we have to discuss when it comes to Lou and B-Rilla, and that's Famous. Famous is actually a really big hit. Some of his songs are really doing well, playing over and over again on the radio, which Lou did turn off. It reminded him of the streets and what he's been through. This is also where B-Rilla questioned, is he gone? Meaning, is he dead? And what do we think? The more we get into season 4, the more I genuinely think Famous could have already been taken off the chessboard. And the theory that was first brought to my attention by Mad Chicken in the comment section, in terms of how Famous's death could be a flashback when Marvin's already got rid of him, could it be true? Later on, we also had Jukebox questioning the same. Let's remember, she's been gone for around 2 months, if not more. This is also the first time we're actually hearing Kanan's perspective. He mentioned there's a lot of talk on the streets, and he doesn't know what to believe, because the streets do talk. He knows he did get grabbed by law enforcement, but now you've got people saying he talked too much and then he bounced. But Juke said something very similar to what Lou said in 402. Fame isn't no snitch. Either way, nobody knows where he is. Is he in LA with Jessica? Is he just laying low? Is he in witness protection? Which is probably unlikely. Or can that theory be true? Has he really been taken off the chessboard? Is this something we will see later on in a flashback? They're definitely building up to something, that's for sure. We're just going to have to be very patient. But I personally believe Famous has already been taken care of. But let's get back to Lou. Now, this is where Lou gave the story about what he was about to do over at Cedar Shores in 310. He was going through a really tough spell, where he thought the answer was to do something very similar to his pops. At this point in the season, Lou was dealing with guilt, shame, maybe a sense of failure. He had struggles with alcohol and his relationships with his family, especially Rock. It really wasn't great. Episode 10 was also where he hit rock bottom. However, what changed was during that moment he saw himself in the mirror. He was basically saying for the first time in a long while, he recognized his own humanity under all the years of pain. He paused and thought about his worth. It wasn't about anybody saving him, this had to come from himself. This moment was pivotal in Lou's story arc because he needed to forgive himself. That was the internal shift. But this whole suicide talk was real, and also ties into the overall theme of Raising Kanan, how the drug game and family dynamics can really grind you down, but also how individually people are battling with their own survival. For Lou, in that moment, choosing not to commit suicide was a big win in a dark moment, and you can tell it definitely hit Rock. For the first time, we actually saw her showing some real support, rather than what we saw in seasons 1 and 2, where she gave him no choice but to be in the game, telling him that everything that he owns belongs to her, how she owns him. I think Lou definitely needed this support, and Rock being here was her way of showing she's with him. I mean, it really is good to see the turn in this relationship, rather than what we saw before. And the fact that Rock is here to support Lou and be there for him, not trying to drag him back into the streets. I think when Lou realizes Rock is in trouble, if something were to happen with Marvin, I'm sure he'll definitely be there for Rock, and I'm sure that time will definitely come at some point in season 4. We're definitely going to see Lou back in the streets, that's for sure. Now with Jukebox, we actually saw her signing up for college. Earlier on, Marvin mentioned maybe she should get back to studying, and this basically answered one of the questions I had for Juke. What was her next plan after she left the army? Which I really don't think she knows either. However, the advisor telling Juke that the course isn't going to change no matter how much she reads the catalogue, I do think that was a little foreshadow to tell us, as the audience, it doesn't matter what Juke does, her course in terms of her journey isn't going to change either. She may just be figuring out who she wants to be for herself, but the course ain't gonna change. Now, she definitely doesn't want to mess with Twinlow and the guy she used to boost clothes with back in season 1. Like she told Nicole, she was done boosting clothes, especially after she got let off the last one. We then saw her go into a gay bar instead, where she met with Mela and a few others. And this is Juke embracing her sexuality, just like she told Kanan. She's definitely going to be more open and honest, because who cares? Now, just like a Lannister always repays his debts, so does Unique. It doesn't matter how he got the money, he made a promise to Ellie Tyler, which he kept. Although Ellie Tyler did warn him, he's playing with fire. The thing is with Unique at this moment in time, he's bringing the heat. He wants to burn everything down to the ground, and his next move was actually targeting Kanan at his apartment. What he was doing earlier at the apartment complex, we can't be 100% sure. I do think we will find out soon. But I highly doubt he's working with Kanan, especially if he's bursting into his apartment, putting a gun to OC. Now, whether Unique is going to kill OC, who knows? It really isn't looking good at this moment in time for OC. I'm sure we'll get the answers in 404, but Unique is definitely proving to be a problem on all fronts. We also saw him keeping an eye on Panessa and Jerome, just like he did in 402. He's still keeping his distance, but trying to provide for them at the same time. I'm sure at some point in the next few episodes there will come a time where he does reveal himself to Panessa, and that's when I think we're going to see him trying to get back to some sort of normality. But with that being said, over to the Thomas dinner. Now, outside just before we get into the family dinner, we did have a small exchange between Kanan and Rock. Rock confronted Kanan about not going to school, because her plan for Kanan ever since the beginning of season 1 was to go to a good school, graduate, become a CEO, or something people from their neighborhood could only dream of. The problem is, Kanan never really had a normal childhood, as we all know. Some of the things Rock has made him do is crazy, because she's crazy, which she never really had a response to. Not often we can say that about Rock. But inside, as the family sat down for their dinner, Jukebox could definitely tell something wasn't right, and her instincts definitely proved to be right. This is where Joyce Thomas admitted she had kidney cancer. She was dying, which was met with a pin drop silence, apart from Rock. She flipped a switch the moment she found out, and I do think this goes way deeper than we first thought. But first, I actually thought Rock telling her mum that she spent all her life lying to them, knocking them around, and thinking a family dinner is going to make things right again is a bit rich coming from Rock. It sounds very familiar, because that's exactly what she tried to do at the beginning of season 2. How ironic. But something has definitely happened in the past which we don't know at this moment in time. During Power Book 2 Go Season 4, I mentioned I'd researched conversations from Woody McLean to Alex Lepre, who left certain clues to tell us Kane may have been molested when he was a child. Well, could this have also been the case for Rock? Is this why she had to terminate a pregnancy when she was younger, which was off the books? Could this explain why her relationship is the way it is with Joyce Thomas? Is this why we haven't heard her side of the story when it comes to Elijah Thomas? There are certain secrets which they're definitely holding back. They're giving us small pieces to a larger puzzle, which will definitely be revealed at some point. I have no doubt it will lead to Rock breaking for the first time. And this whole pregnancy storyline we saw in 401, the clues they left in regards to this not being her first rodeo, her having an abortion off the books, there's a reason they left these clues. It definitely will be coming full circle in Raising Kanan Season 4.